This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, your solution when you need a virtual server in the cloud. Use the code MacVoices2019 to take $20 off your first purchase at linode.com/MacVoices. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, many of us are in the process of making the transition over to macOS Catalina, getting used to the new OS and what it brings and what it takes away and sort of what it has rearranged. And that's why I wanted to definitely talk to a Take Control author about a new book, Take Control of macOS Media Apps, Mr. Kirk McElhearn. Kirk, welcome. It's great to see you.
Chuck, it's good to be back. We haven't talked in a long time. I see your desk behind you still looks the same as last time.
It goes through phases, Kirk, but unfortunately you always hit it on a down phase for some reason. I don't know why.
I like ribbing you about that.
Oh, I know. That's fine. I think I've mentioned to you before that some listeners play this game of what's on Chuck's desk now. So it's
and which lights are on. I see the green lights are on your Drobo, so that's fine. Listeners will spot if one of your drive goes bad during the recording.
Exactly, which I think at one point it had, and people were like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" It's like, yeah, nothing. Just slide a new drive in, and
yeah,
good, yeah. So this book is, first of all, it's kind of a sequel to prior books about iTunes, but it's a new book because now we have 3 media apps in macOS Catalina, and I should mention too,
we have 4.
4?
Well, the Books app.
Oh, the Books app. I forgot about the Books app.
Yeah, okay, so let's start with the basics. iTunes before handled music, videos, podcasts, audiobooks, voice memos and ringtones went a couple years ago, but those 4 types of content were split into 4 apps. Music for music, TV for movies and TV shows and home videos, podcasts for podcasts, I guess you can figure that out, and audiobooks went to the Books app. Now, the Books app came out, 2 years ago to handle ebooks, but they've moved audiobooks into the Books app. So there are a total of 4 different apps for the media, and to sync your stuff, you use the Finder. So that formerly, as some people say, bloated iTunes was split into 5 apps, or 4 apps plus some features to add to the bloat in the Finder.
Kirk, I know a lot of people were kind of challenging iTunes. They were unhappy with iTunes and the way it was. I think it's rather amusing that now that we have broken it up, people are saying, maybe iTunes wasn't so bad. I kind of liked having everything together.
I can point to articles I wrote about that years and years ago, discussing the issue of bloat. If in iTunes you could hide the features you didn't use, you never used audiobooks, you hide them. You never used podcasts, you hide them. I don't see how that ever made the app bloated. I think the idea of bloat came initially from Windows users who were annoyed that they had to download iTunes and QuickTime and some other software, and that every time there was an iTunes update, they would have to re-download all this stuff. Now, on the Mac, a lot of this is system frameworks, so we didn't have the same kind of issue. But you're right. I'm seeing people who are rethinking some of their acerbic comments about iTunes now, that it's actually quite complicated to work with these 4, even 5 apps if you sync content.
Okay, so let's go from the ground up, because I think that most people probably use music more than any of the apps. So how, in your opinion, does music app stack up now with iTunes, and what should we be doing to get used to it?
One thing that I have not liked in iTunes in the past few years was the navigational system. Now, if you remember iTunes 12, you had this little menu on the top left, which was called the Media Picker. And you would choose a type of media, music, movies, audiobooks, etc. Then in the right section, you would have a number of tabs. And this meant that, let's say you were in music, you went to the iTunes store, and then you were in movies, well, it would be in the iTunes store. You'd have to click back to go to your library. And there was always this, it was like a pivot table in a spreadsheet. There were always 2 axes conflicting. Now, the music app being just one media kind, it's a lot simpler. You don't have that kind of navigation. All the navigation essentially is in the sidebar. So at the top, you've got the Apple Music entries. I don't have it on the screen, but I'm going to say it's For You, Browse, and then Radio. I think it's in that order. Below that, you have the iTunes Store, and below that, you have playlists. So you're only navigating from one selection, as it were. And you can reduce that. If you don't want to use the iTunes Store, you can turn it off. However, if you're an Apple Music subscriber, when you launch the music app, you won't see the iTunes Store. You'll be able to turn it on in the general preferences. So Apple's trying to push people into Apple Music. If they're in Apple Music, they don't want them to go out to the store. So I think the simplification there is that you don't have this complicated navigation. Now, unfortunately, the way you view your content, some of it has changed. A lot of it takes up more space, so you can't view as much. And I'm on my 13-inch MacBook Pro right now, and if I look at an album in, I guess they're going to call it expanded album views. So you have the large artwork and then you have the tracks beneath it. Once you get above about 10 tracks, you can't see any more. Now, previously, you could change the size of that and you would see maybe 2 albums. And in albums view, you would click album artwork and it would kind of expand on the same view and you'd see the tracks below it. But now everything's so big that whenever you look at something, you can't see a lot. It makes the display perhaps more attractive, especially if you're looking from a distance, but it makes it a little bit more complicated to navigate, I find.
I've installed it on a secondary machine, and so I'm just starting to play with it and get familiar with it. One of the things I was surprised, at least the way it showed up on my machine, is that the iTunes logo, or pretty much something very close to it, is the new music logo for the icon.
Yeah, they've changed the colors a bit. They put a border around it, and that's it. If you remember when at the WWDC when they finally announced how the apps were going to be split up, lots of the general mainstream media was saying that iTunes was dead. If you look in there, it's the iTunes Store, and there's all sorts of references to iTunes. As you say, the icon looks very similar. Don't forget, Windows users are still using iTunes because Apple has not said whether they're going to make this same split on Windows. Of course, Windows users would complain now that it's bloated even more because they've got multiple apps that they have to download. So I think it's a continuum from iTunes. I don't think it's a radical change. It does correspond to the way we use iOS with the same 4 apps, music, TV, podcasts, and books. But if someone's only using music, they won't notice, well, they'll notice the interface being different, but there won't be any problem for them navigating 4 apps. But someone like me who has a big media library of all kinds of media, well, that means I gotta have all these windows open, and each one is a little bit different. The interfaces are slightly different. It's confusing. Yeah, it's confusing.
See, but that's an interesting point, though. The interfaces, if you're dealing with different types of media, they probably should be just a little bit different to reflect the characteristics of that media. Is that not a fair statement, or do you think that
yes
they really
and no.
could?
Have you already talked about Catalyst apps on MacVoices?
Yeah, we have.
Okay, so Catalyst apps are apps that don't have the same flexibility as native Mac apps. Essentially, they're iOS apps that can be ported to Mac or vice versa. And the Books app and the Podcast app are both Catalyst apps. So again, you don't have the same kind of options to move things around, the same kind of interface elements. Yet the music and TV apps are native Mac apps. So this makes the approach a little bit. It's like they're different flavors, right? The music and TV apps are similar, and the books and podcast apps are similar. But if you look at the actual interfaces, the movies and the books apps have tabs on the top and a sidebar. The podcast app just has a sidebar, and the music app just has a sidebar. So I think if they had the same or similar interface across all 4 apps, it would be a lot smoother.
Okay. I mean, and I don't disagree that there should be similarities at some point, but it also feels like for example, I don't music I'm probably never going to listen to at double speed. But if I'm listening to audiobooks, yeah, I would like to be able to control the speed. I'm really
and
not
that's the Books app that wasn't in iTunes before.
Right. And I'm really not sure that I would want to watch video necessarily double speed, although there have been times that it's kind of nice to kick up a little bit, but
Yeah, I think sometimes you might want to do that if you've shot a video and you want to scan it. Say it's a home video, you're scrubbing ahead or something. But those uh, this speed change doesn't have to display when you're playing music. If it was all in one app, or if all four apps were exactly the same, the speed control wouldn't display when you show music. And so, actually, there's another interesting thing. The controls for music are at the top. The controls for audiobooks are at the bottom of the sidebar. The controls for podcasts are at the top. And for movies, they're on the video themselves. So each different app, each different media kind has a different way, a different approach, which isn't necessarily required. You could use similar controllers for movies and for audiobooks, for example.
yeah, I agree. And it sounds like the video is more akin to what we see on the iPad than,
Yeah, or what you see on QuickTime Player on the Mac as well. It's very
yeah,
similar to that.
yeah. How
Um,
about,
I would like to just point out, though, that they have removed one of the most useful navigational tools in iTunes that was in the app since the very first version, and that's the column browser. Now, you may not know about it, but there is a subset of people who use this because what you could do is if you press Command B in iTunes 12 or earlier, you would get a bit that drops down on the top and it would have a column, genre, artist, album. So you could click a genre, scan your artist, very compact, so you can scan it easily, and then find all the albums. And they've removed that. And that means for me, that was the way that I've been navigating iTunes since maybe not the first version because it didn't have a lot of music in iTunes very early on, but it is just the way that I have been navigating my music for more than 10 years. And so I find that disappointing. The only way you can really get close to that for me is albums view. And then if you press Command Shift F, you get a filter bar. And as you type, it's one of these live search things that reduces what's visible, but it's really laggy. So it's quite uncomfortable for me to navigate my large library of about 70,000 tracks, about 4,000 albums.
I think, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you had found a solution. I find it equally challenging because I don't have quite the library you have, but I have a substantial library, and it can be a little challenging to find a particular track or a particular album that you're looking for, just by using the searches. That you can do it, but it seems like there should be a better way. But I'm not smart enough to know what it is. Sounds like you found it.
Well, if it were more reactive, if it would change immediately when I type, then I would be happier. And I'm not sure why there's such a lag because the library file itself goes into memory, so it should be almost instantaneous. Essentially, my friend Doug Adams, who's been on the show, he explained that it's essentially you're searching the library. Each time you add a character, it performs a new search, and if that's in RAM, it should be relatively quick. Now, this really only affects people with a lot of music, but when you've got 50 million tracks in Apple Music to choose from, I think maybe more and more people are going to be adding more music to their libraries rather than just sticking with what they have already, unless they never add music and they just go to For You or browse for the latest albums.
Kirk, I don't want to take us down too much of a side street here, but I'll go this direction just for the fun of it. Anyone that listens to this show knows I'm a big fan of this show you and Doug do called The Next Track. Do you think this has anything to do with the way people listen to music today? That it's a bit of a different approach to listening to music and using their libraries than you and I have?
Oh, definitely. And if you go back into the early episodes, so we're up at episode 159 or 160, I think, and we went to Fortnightly early this year. But so this is about 4 years, 3 or 4 years we've been doing this. And the very early episodes, we were talking about how much we like to own our music and not rent it. And now we're both pretty much committed streamers. And so if people like us who've been listening to music, for so long have made that shift, I think it's obvious that many, many other people have as well. I still buy some music. There's still music I like that's not available on Apple Music. But it's true that I'm buying less now than I was before, and I'm streaming an awful lot more from Apple Music. So I don't know, yesterday, we're recording this on Monday, and over this past weekend, I was doing my final edits on this book. And so Sunday morning, I'm in my comfy chair with my laptop. I want to listen to something. I don't know what I want to listen to. So I go to For You and I find something. And it's taken a couple of years for Apple Music to really understand my tastes, which are quite eclectic. But I can almost be guaranteed that on any given day, I can find an album to listen to there without having to search beyond the For You page. Now, that's me doing lazy listening, thinking I just want music to keep me occupied rather than I really want to hear this particular Beethoven string quartet recording. But we all do lazy listening at times. And I think Apple Music has gotten really good at that. I think it does take a while to learn what you like. You have to play things over and over. You have to indicate that you love them, which is kind of a word that I don't always love them. Like there are some that I like and some I like a lot and some I really like. But it does learn over time. And I'm finding this satisfying for the times when I just want to do lazy listening. I just came up with that. It's a good idea, lazy listening. Doug and I often call that using music as wallpaper because that's what it is. It's just background music. But I think lazy listening describes my motivation when I do that.
Hmm. So let's leave music for a second and head over to podcasts, something near and dear to both our hearts because we're both podcast producers. How do you feel that the podcast app stacks up to some of the third-party options that we've been using up to this point?
Well, I haven't used a podcast app on the Mac for years. The last non-iTunes podcast app I used was Downcast, and that was years ago. They had a Mac app, an iOS app, and they seem to have slipped, and the reviews lately aren't very positive. I listen to most of my podcasts on my iPhone with Overcast. Even if I'm in my office, I have a Sonos amp, and so I just stream from my iPhone with AirPlay to the Sonos amp because Overcast has that killer feature that they call Smart Speed, which means that when people are speaking slowly, it speeds them up by getting rid of all the silence, and you can listen to a 30-minute podcast in 23 minutes or something. And for that feature alone, it's worth it, and it syncs to all my iOS devices. It's a no-brainer. As for the podcast app on Mac, Discovery is not great. It's not as easy as it was in iTunes. One of the biggest problems is there are people who have large archives of podcasts that they've saved, podcasts that they like, that they want to listen to again. The music and TV apps will let you choose where the files are stored. And this can be either in your home folder or on an external drive. As I have a large media library, music, videos, etc., this was always on an external drive. Podcasts, however, and books store things in your library folder. So if you had a huge podcast archive, which admittedly is an edge case, these files won't fit in your home folder. Now, the podcast app can still find them where they were before, but new files get downloaded in your home folder, and it gets kind of creaky if you really want to keep podcasts. As for the playback features, they're very similar to what's on iOS. They've got a speed control as well, but it's not as efficient as Overcast. You can sync your subscriptions across devices, so from your Mac to your iPhone to your iPad. You can download new episodes, let you know, show you what's new, what's recently been updated. It's a good app. I just prefer Overcast because of these wonderful playback features.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those cases where Apple has given you a very serviceable, very, very good app. But I'm with you. Overcast is the gold standard, I think. I for a long time I was a huge Downcast fan, but for several reasons. One of the killer features, though, that Overcast when it got me was that I could upload my own audio files and have them available in a podcast fashion, or at least in the interface, and have the benefit of the speed and the smart listening and everything. That was just such a big thing that's when I switched over. But I'm happy to see that the podcast app looks like it's gotten some love and is competent.
The features aren't that different from what was in iTunes 12. The layout's a bit different. The lack of a more coherent storefront, and they don't even call it the iTunes Store anymore in the podcast app, but the storefront it's kind of poor in the sense that there's not a lot of content. It's not really easy to browse through it. But other than that, if you used iTunes 12 for podcasts, you won't notice any huge differences.
All right, so that means we're headed toward the TV, audio, video app. And this is an especially big deal now, as we are not exactly on the eve, but we're getting close to it, of Apple TV Plus becoming a thing. So how do you feel about this?
November, right?
Yeah. So how do you feel about this? What kind of a job have they done with this?
Well, the TV app is pretty much the TV app on Apple TV. Although it's not a Catalyst app, it's a native Mac app. It's got that main screen with up next. So it shows like a poster frame of what you've been watching. Then it shows what's up next. Then there's tabs, movies, TV shows, kids, store. No, movies, TV shows, kids, library, I think. Again, I don't have it open in front of me. It's well organized. I don't have a lot of content. I don't get a lot of content from the iTunes store. If I rent a movie, I'll do it on my Apple TV. I'll watch it on my TV set. I won't watch it on my Mac. What I do have in my Mac is, I don't know, a few months ago, they had the entire Twilight Zone for $30. So I've got the 161 episodes or whatever, and they all show up. And I've got The West Wing, and I've got things like that I bought, The Wire. But I don't really watch them on my Mac. I watch them on TV generally. Now, of course, one of the things that changes now is that you have the option to sync your content to an iOS device. In this case, let's say an iPad for TV and movies, or just download it from the cloud. Now, if you've got bandwidth, it makes more sense to download it from the cloud and not even worry about syncing. And, I've told you about my Victorian internet in the past, but since we last spoke, I have 300 megabits down and 50 megabits up. We got fiber to the property in my little village.
Whoa, congratulations.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I could download those Catalina betas in about 4 minutes, which instead of about an hour, which is what it took before. So with that bandwidth, I don't really care about syncing a device. I don't care about storing all my videos to eventually sync them to an iPad or eventually have my Apple TV go to my iTunes library and show them on my TV. I don't worry about that anymore. Now, a lot of people don't have the bandwidth, and this was my case for years. So you will want to download your videos when you can, so you can sync them, so you can view them on the Apple TV. And I think that, do a lot of people watch videos on the Mac? Unless maybe they're traveling and they're on an airplane and they'll be watching videos. I'm not sure that the Mac is really designed for watching videos. I think people are more likely these days to use a mobile device or a TV with an Apple TV. So for me, the TV app seems to be the thing. You check on your library. Maybe you want to go look for a movie to watch later. And in some cases, it's actually easier to navigate the iTunes store for videos on a Mac than it is on the Apple TV. So maybe you're going to look and you'll rent a movie and it'll be available on your Apple TV later on. One thing to point out, if you remember that there was this home sharing feature that would allow you to share your iTunes library to another Mac, to another PC, or to an Apple TV, that's moved into system preferences in the sharing pane. It's called media sharing. And so the case where I said before, I've downloaded all these videos. I want to watch West Wing. And I've got all the videos on my iMac. So I would point my Apple TV to my iMac, which had my video library, and it would be able to stream them. The advantage of it being a system feature now is that the music and TV apps don't even have to be running. Your Mac will have to be running, but you don't need to run the apps, and you don't need to worry if an app freezes or crashes that prevents access to the files. So I think that's an improvement for the Apple TV Mac ecosystem for the link between the two of them.
Linode.com/MacVoices is where you want to go if you need a virtual hosted cloud server. Why is Linode so great? Because that's what Linode specializes in. They feature native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and industry-leading processors so that your server is fast fast. Because you pay for only what you use, with hourly billing across all plans and add-on services. No extra charges for data transfer, no hidden fees or nasty surprises at the end of the month. Because Linode has a new cloud manager with an improved user interface, so deploying your server or servers is easier than ever. Because Linode has data centers around the world, including one just launched in Toronto and one opening soon in Mumbai. So if location matters, Linode has it covered. Because they have a large documentation library to help you get started and help you make the most of your server. Because Linode has 24/7 live customer support, so if you get stuck or have issues, help is just a phone call away. Because Linode has a ton of add-ons, so that you can customize your server with exactly what you want and what you need. Backups, blocks, node balancers, load balancers, and much more. So what do you need to take advantage of all this? Visit linode.com/MacVoices to get set up and to get $20 credit towards your first server. Again, linode.com/MacVoices gets you $20 off your first server. Check it out now and be up and running in minutes. Thanks to Linode for their support of MacVoices. To your point about shopping for shows, if you will, on your Mac and maybe then having them on your Apple TV, that feels suspiciously like, changing the way that you're listening to music. Now you're talking about changing the way you're watching video, or you're acquiring video or shopping for video. And I really hadn't thought about that, but I feel like that, because I do feel like that it is a better experience to do some of that on the Mac. It just feels smoother to me.
Had you years ago ever downloaded a rented movie to iTunes and then gone to sync it to an iOS device?
Yeah, and I gave up on the practice because it was a little challenging.
Right, because you didn't sync it. You had to copy it. You had to remove it from iTunes it would copy and delete from iTunes. Whereas now you rent a movie, if it asks you want to download it, you say, no, it's in the cloud. You can access it on whatever device. You could rent a movie on your iMac before you go off to the airport. And then when you take your iPad, you can download the movie while you're waiting to get on your plane. And you don't have any of those hassles anymore. So I think it's the back-end cloud infrastructure that changes the way we access the content that we've purchased or that we're renting. And I think that makes a big difference. And the similarity of interface in the TV app, I think, is very good because, in the music app, you'll have thousands or tens of thousands of tracks. In movies, do you have 100 movies? Do you have 10 or 20 TV shows? Most people don't have anywhere near as large a library just because of the nature of movies versus music.
Okay, so we have one last component of this media organizational thing, and that is the Books app for audiobooks. And I've become a huge audiobook fan because I find that it lets me make use of time that was otherwise being wasted. I'm able to consume. I'm hesitant to use the word read, but I'm able to consume books that I really would never have a chance to do so otherwise. So this was really important to me and how it was being approached.
Do you get your books from Apple or from Audible?
Both. Kind of
Really?
depends on who
Audible's better. It's so much cheaper. Apple, essentially every book is $15. With Audible, you get an annual subscription. It's either, 1 credit a month, or if you buy the whole 12 credits up front, it's cheaper. I know mine just re-upped here in the UK. I think it was £70 for 12 credits, and you get them all at once. And when it runs out, if you need more, you can buy another 12 for the same price. It's like the equivalent of $100. That's much cheaper than getting from Apple. So if you do get your audiobooks from Apple, they show up in the Books app. Just like with the TV app, they're going to be in the Books app on all your devices. You can download them anywhere. If you listen to some on your Mac and then stop and then go to your iPhone, the position is synced. If you get them from Audible, you drag them into the Books app. Same thing happens. That's not true. Your physician will sync, but they'll only sync if you've got them in the Books app on the other devices. So ebooks and PDFs can go into the cloud with the Books app, but audiobooks can't, and that's a little bit confusing. I've had a couple people write into me since Catalina came out, thinking that that would be the case, that Audible books would also sync in the cloud. So Apple is clearly giving the advantage to their own content, but do you really want to put your audiobooks from Audible in the cloud using up your iCloud storage space?
I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, I guess that's a fair point. But you can still take them out at some point.
You can, but do you think a lot of people are going to do that? And then they go get a new iPhone, and there's not enough space to back it up, and they lose their photos, and they sue Apple, and there's someone just filed a lawsuit against Apple for that very reason. He lost all his photos.
I don't know, Kurt. It feels like I think we're all still struggling with digital media. That just what you said. We talk about backups of your individual music library, the music you own that you've either ripped from CDs or that you've purchased for whatever reason, not from Apple, and the stuff is not available in the Apple Music Store. And the same thing here. Now we're talking about books, and now we're talking about video. And
each type of content has its own rules about how you manage it, and there is no you can't say what you do with one type of content is what you do with another. Apple considers it podcast or disposable, and I think for most people they are. You can save episodes, but it's not what it does by default. Movies and TV shows, they consider that you're going to watch them once, and then you don't need to keep them. So you might be more tempted to delete them from your library, or you can have the app automatically delete them after you've watched them, which is a good way to save space as well. Books kind of are in between because Apple sells books, Audible sells books. You can rip CDs of books that you've bought and put them in there as well. So I think if Apple's going to make progress on all of this in the coming years, they have to normalize the way we deal with each type of media. They tell us that we can put 100,000 tracks in the cloud with Apple Music or iTunes Match, and that's fine. We don't have to worry about how much storage it uses. They tell us we can have all our TV shows and movies. We don't care about that. We need to have the same thing with audiobooks. Podcasts, again, they're disposable, so you can theoretically always re-download them, but it would be better if there was some coherence across the four types.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, and it's one that I hadn't really thought about. I've just sort of accepted, okay, that this media has this interface and that media has that interface, and while there are similarities, it probably would be nice to have things a little more uniform.
Yeah, I think for audiobooks that would be useful. Again, because Audible provides Apple's audiobooks. The books in the bookstore, that the audiobooks in the bookstore come from Audible. Apple doesn't do that themselves. So whether you buy from Apple or Audible, you've got the exact same content. It's just who you bought them from and who is charging more or less. If you very rarely listen to audiobooks, Apple's probably a better choice because they might be cheaper per book than sometimes at Audible. But if you're a regular listener, don't not get an Audible membership. Either, as I said, one credit a month or two a month or 12 at a time. It comes to £6 or £7 for an audiobook for me. And these are books that sell for £20 to £40 usually. Don't pay sticker price for audiobooks, basically.
Yeah, thank you for that tip, because I didn't know about the buying 12 credits at a time. When I've subscribed to Audible, I've been on the 1 credit per month plan, and so thank you for that. That'll save me.
And the other thing that they do, I think, with all the subscriptions is if you don't like an audiobook, you can return it and get your credit back. And I've done this a couple times recently with just really bad narrators. It just didn't have the tone for the type of book. And that I find that Audible really cultivates a long-term relationship with listeners because they know that most people who listen to audiobooks listen to them regularly and listen a lot. And they want Audible to be the one-stop shop, and I think they do a good job. I know it's an Amazon-owned company, and there's all the things that Amazon does that aren't great. But Audible has been doing this really well since before Amazon bought them.
Kirk,
Do you know what the first? Hold on. Do you know what the first commercial audio player was in the United States?
The first commercial audio player? You mean portable audio player?
Portable audio player. I don't remember its exact name. If you look it up, it was a little device from Audible that had like an SD card in it, and I think you could put one or two books on it. And this goes back. This is pre-iPod. And it was just for audiobooks and very low bit rates. I think they were using 8 kilobits per second at the time. I'll send you a link after we're off. I had one of these way, way back before the iPod.
I don't think I knew that. I don't. I mean,
it had a short life because the iPod. It might have come out in 1999-ish, and then the iPod came out in 2001. It didn't last very long, and it was obviously only for audiobooks. So it didn't get a lot of press, but it was tiny. It was less than, I don't know, smaller than a pack of cigarettes.
Wow. Yeah, you look back, I mean, I remember some of the portable audio devices I had back then, and especially when it moved to digital, and there were so many of them. They were all over the map. And they offered different feature sets. Some would record, some would let you plug in an external mic, some wouldn't. And the iPod came along, and that just all washed virtually all of it away, which was a very good thing.
Yeah. So we didn't discuss the fifth element here, the Finder, because you use the Finder to sync. So you connect your iOS device to your iPod, you select it in the Finder sidebar, and you see in the Finder window an interface almost exactly like the sync interface in iTunes 12. One of the problems with this is, I don't know about you, but I don't keep my Finder windows full screen. I keep them kind of small. And sometimes in order to get to all the sections, you have to open the window quite large. In your music, you can choose artists up here and albums down there. So you really need to make the window big enough for it. But all your syncing goes through the Finder. And well, it's yet another tool, but it's a tool that's always there. So you could say it's 4.5 apps to replace iTunes.
So how do you find the syncing experience? I mean, let's just say I have 2 movies, a couple albums, and an audiobook that I want to sync. Do I just drag them all over?
No, you just check your settings for each one. So sync music, sync selected music. What I always recommend to people is, if they're not going to sync their entire music library, to create a playlist in the iTunes or music app, put all the music in that playlist they want to sync, and then in the sync interface, they just check that playlist instead of scrolling around to check each album and each artist that they want to sync. And they can go back to the music app and alter that playlist, add music, remove it. And so one of the problems with syncing is it's either sync everything or choose what you want to sync. So you'll have to click each episode of a TV show that you want to sync. There are other options. You can take like the last 10, the 10 next unwatched episodes. There are a number of shortcuts like that. But for music, it can be painful to spend the time in the sync interface to choose what you want to sync. This said, I haven't synced an iOS device for that stuff in years. So here's my strategy. We've certainly discussed in the past about when iCloud Music came out, which is now called Cloud Music. They've dropped the I. Initially, it munged my library, changed my tags, and I went back and said, whoa, don't want to deal with this. So my main listening library is on my iMac, about 70,000 tracks. On my MacBook Pro, I have my Cloud Music library, which I set up. I add music to, I copy some music from my iMac, I add music from Apple Music, and that's what I use on my portable devices. So I no longer sync anything. My iPads, my iPhone, they all access my Cloud Music library. Now, if I were going on a trip, I would probably want to sync some videos, but it would depend on whether I have them locally or whether they're videos from Apple, in which case it's easier to download them to my iPad than it is to download them to my iMac and then sync them. Again, because I now have lightning fast internet.
Right. Right, which is
For
what
movies that
Apple's
I've
been waiting for everybody to have.
everyone should have this. And it's funny because I'm in a village of about 200 people, and they put fiber to the property here because they're basically trying. They're not installing copper with new homes anymore in this country. It's fiber all the way as much as possible because it's less maintenance essentially.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of DVDs and Blu-rays that I've ripped, but I use Plex to manage those. And Plex, I have an app on my Apple TV. If I want, I can download, quote, from Plex, from my library on my iMac, Plex library, to my iPad, for instance, if I want to put some movies on that. So the process is different. There's no plug-in syncing to use that. Um, we should talk about Plex one day. I don't really use it a lot. I only use it for movies and TV, but it's really brilliant when it's your own content. Obviously, with Apple's content as DRM, you can't use it anywhere else.
Right. So let's shift over to the book for just a second as we wrap up. How do you approach getting people up to speed with all of these apps? Do you walk them through one at a time, or do you walk through processes? What's your approach to this?
Well, so if you remember, this book started out 3 years ago with iTunes 12, and we called it Take Control of iTunes 12, the FAQ. And it was the first time that we tried this question answer approach for a Take Control book. We've dropped that. So I've reorganized everything. I've rewritten everything into like a more standard book. Since most people want to know about how to use the music app, that's where I spend most of my time. Um, Once you know how to use the music app, you know how to make playlists in the TV app because you can make playlists of movies and TV shows. You'll know how to tag your tracks in the TV app. You can't tag anything in books or in podcasts anymore. And that's one of the big losses of having a Catalyst app, that you can't change the metadata on your content. So if you rip an audio book and move it into the Books app, you need to change your tags before you move it, because once you move it, you can't do anything to it. So I walk people through the music app. I explain how to use Apple Music, how to use the iTunes Store because you're still using it for music. And I talk a lot about sharing, about streaming. There's a chapter about the TV app, about the podcast app, about using audiobooks in the Books app. And there's all sorts of tips and tricks. And some of these tips go back 15 years to early iTunes and things that are still valid. And one of my favorite is when you're in your music library and you're playing something and you want to get back to that item and you don't remember how you got to it. You press Command L and it just takes you back to that item wherever you were looking at it, whether it's artist view or albums view or whatever. And this probably dates back to the first version of iTunes. Everything about ripping and tagging files, that really hasn't changed. The interface looks the same. The options are the same. It's really the top level. It's what's between you and the music that's changed. The way you approach it, how you view it. Some of the views are similar. Some are very different. It's in this edition of the book, and this is a long-term strategy. I talk a lot about under iTunes 12, you did this, now you do that. And the next edition of this book probably won't make that transition because iTunes 12 was out for about 3 years, and we did 2 full editions of the book along with some minor updates. I'm thinking that the apps we have now are going to live for at least 3 years. So the next time we'll update this book for whatever will be in the future, I don't think we'll be making reference to iTunes as much as we are now. But one of my main goals here is to help people make that transition from the iTunes world that's been around for 18 years to this new world of 4.5 different apps.
And I think that's the approach you have to take because you're right. I mean, I know how to do everything I wanted to do with iTunes with any of the media that it handled. And now all of a sudden, gee, do I go here? Do I go there? And I think, I mean, podcasts and audiobooks are a perfect example. And I'm not saying that it was wrong to include them in iTunes at one point for podcasts and up till recently with audiobooks. Because they were audio entertainment, but it also, they were not music. And so it does feel a little better to have it
Why
sort
does
of.
that matter that they were not music? Videos were not music. No one complained about that.
Yeah,
See,
no.
the one advantage of having them all in iTunes is that the interface was the same for each media kind. And while that may have held you back in certain ways, it meant that you could change the tags for any kind of media. You could make playlists you could actually make playlists with all the different kinds of media. A playlist could contain an album, a movie, and an audiobook. And now we have to think, we're fragmented instead of thinking in one framework. And I find that is a big conceptual difference. They said, I'm sure that, going to just toss out a figure, 80% of people probably only use it for music, so they won't really care. The audiobook people, what, 5 or 10% of people listen to audiobooks? How many people listen to podcasts? A lot, but I think podcasts are much more of a mobile type of content. And, videos are videos. Do you watch them on your Mac? You might. I mean, I've got a 21-inch iMac. It's got a great display. If I wanted to sit in my office chair here and watch a movie, I could, but that's not comfortable. Now, you might watch a movie on your laptop when you're traveling, and that's fair. But I don't think it's the medium of choice for people to use a computer to watch a movie. An iPad, yes, because you can hold it up and you can see it more comfortably. But I think Apple can't make them exactly the same as they are, Mac, iPad, but they're getting really close. Yet I don't feel on the iPad that there is any inconsistency. And that's interesting. Perhaps it's because I'm more used to having more control on the Mac. For instance, you can't change tags of your music on an iPad or an iPhone. You can only do that on the Mac. But for some reason, on my iPad or iPhone, I don't miss that, because for me, those devices are thin clients. They're showing the content that I've organized someplace else. So they're not meant to be tools of that kind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense, and I think it points to what Apple's target audience is not the music enthusiast that you are, or maybe that I am, that collects, not just released albums, but bootlegs and unofficial recordings and interviews and all of those things. And that goes for video too. I think people want to consume it, they want to enjoy it, and they want to move on and save their favorites to re-enjoy later. And so this is Apple's target market, and that's not a bad thing. It just is different, maybe, than the way that you and I look at things, and so we're suddenly in the minority, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I kind of wish that they kept like a pro version of at least the music app, or there was like a hidden menu command to change to bring the advanced features back. Because just the column browser, it makes me sad, losing that.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. So this book is, as we are speaking, it's not out yet, but by the time you hear this, it will be out at takecontrolbooks.com. You can get it. I think Joe was putting together all kind of Catalina bundles to help people acquire the different books and get up to speed and use Catalina more efficiently. Kirk, do you know what the price of this book is standalone?
This is $14.99, and I'm sure it's going to be in one of the bundles, but we haven't discussed it yet.
Right. Yeah.
As I said, we're recording this on Monday, and over the weekend, Joe said, "Oh, great, we can get this out early next week." So any day now, of course, if you're listening to this, it's already out. So, but
Yeah.
any day now, it will be out. And I'm sure it's going to be in a bundle, and it's great. And check out the other Catalina books too, because there are a lot of changes in Catalina that can be disturbing. Just before we started this interview, I said, hold on, I got to click all these dialogues here to get into this video conference. Yes, do you want to let it do this and do that? And so Catalina's got all these warning dialogues and security features. And I don't know about, well, you said you don't run Catalina yet on your main Mac. I'm not enjoying it. I've had a lot of problems. My iMac keeps crashing, and it's not the best experience. So my MacBook Pro has been incredibly stable. So,
And so far, I've on my secondary machine that I've played with it. It's fine. I'm sort of going through testing my critical apps to see what does and doesn't work. And I can't say that I've had. I mean, the security things. Look, that's just the way it is. It's an annoyance.
Yeah,
but it's the world
but
we live in.
it's good. It's good for us. It protects us. Like whenever you and this isn't new to Catalina. This is new to Safari 13, which came out a month or so ago. When you go to download something from a website for the first time, you have to confirm that you want to download it. And this prevents drive-by downloads, which are when you go to a website that someone's hacked and it automatically downloads something which you may accidentally open later. So this prevents that from happening. You'll be warned whenever a download is going to occur.
And this is what Apple's doing. They're doubling down on privacy. I know Dave Hamilton has used the example. You can make your house completely secure by welding the doors shut and putting steel plates over the windows, but then it's useless to you. So you have to, but this way you're putting locks and keys on everything and warnings and notifications, and it's too bad, but that's the way it is. So
yeah.
Kirk, thank you so much for all the discussion. I really appreciate you kind of forcing us to look at some of this and think about our media maybe in a little different way than we have before, since it was all unified and now it's broken apart. We'll get back together again and cover more of it as we move forward.
Okay. Thanks for having me again, Chuck.
I do want to make sure before you go, though, that you tell everybody where folks can find all your writings and your talking and the whole bit with your podcasts and on social media.
Yes. So kirkbill.com is my website, and you'll find all my podcasts there, including The Next Track. And Chuck has been a guest on The Next Track. That is at thenexttrack.com. On Twitter, I am at McElhearn, McElhearn, and don't look for me on Facebook.
Thanks so much, Kirk. A little editorial comment there at the end. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Definitely go check out Kirk's book. It'll help you get more out of your media as you make the transition to Catalina. And that's something that we're all going to have to do at some point. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.